if we start regulating in ways that outlaw various foods, what we're really doing is we're denying consumers choice.
Those who need to have lobbyists on Capitol Hill are those who come under criticism for the kinds of products they make and the damage they potentially do.
The disruption that recently hit the American food industry did not begin with a tariff announcement or a trade sanction. It began with a structural adjustment inside a supply chain that had remained stable for decades. The United States food manufacturing sector relies heavily on vegetable oils for large-scale production. Among these oils, canola oil holds a dominant position due to its neutral flavor, high smoke point, and cost efficiency. According to data published by the United States Department of Agriculture Canada, supplies more than 70% of total canola oil imports into the United States. This level of concentration represents a critical dependency within a system that produces hundreds of billions of dollars in processed food annually. The significance of this dependency was largely overlooked because the supply had historically been consistent, predictable, and economically efficient. That perception changed when Canada introduced a coordinated set of policy adjustments affecting canola production, processing, and export allocation. The policy included a reduction in export volumes to the United States combined with increased domestic processing capacity and the expansion of long-term supply agreements with multiple international partners. The financial commitment to domestic processing alone exceeded $500 million, directed toward expanding crushing and refining infrastructure. This shift altered the structure of the supply chain by moving production value from raw export toward finished product control within Canada. As a result, the availability of canola oil on the open market decreased significantly for buyers who were not secured under long-term contracts. Food manufacturers in the United States operate under systems designed for efficiency rather than redundancy. Production lines are calibrated around specific ingredients, and altering those inputs requires adjustments across formulation sourcing and cost management. When canola oil supply tightened, companies faced immediate operational challenges. Market data indicated that canola oil futures experienced a sharp increase within days of the policy announcement, reflecting expectations of reduced supply and higher demand. This price movement translated directly into increased input costs for food producers. Large corporations, including major snack manufacturers and packaged food companies, began issuing statements to investors indicating potential cost pressures and the likelihood of pricing adjustments. The impact extended beyond packaged goods into the restaurant sector. Commercial food service operations rely heavily on canola oil due to its performance characteristics in high-volume cooking environments. Industry estimates indicate that fast food chains collectively use hundreds of millions of pounds of cooking oil annually. Changes in supply conditions therefore affect not only production costs but also menu pricing strategies and operational margins. At the same time, substitution options presented limitations. Soybean oil represents a potential alternative, but differs in flavor, profile, and thermal properties requiring adjustments in food preparation. Palm oil presents environmental and reputational challenges that many companies have actively sought to avoid through sustainability commitments. Sunflower oil supply remains constrained due to geopolitical disruptions affecting major producing regions. Corn oil is available in smaller volumes and at higher cost levels, limiting its viability as a large-scale replacement. These constraints mean that short-term substitution cannot fully compensate for reduced canola availability. The issue is not simply the existence of alternatives, but the ability to scale those alternatives to match existing demand. Scaling agricultural production involves time investment and infrastructure development. Changes in crop allocation require adjustments in planting cycles, processing capacity, and distribution networks. As a result, supply chain adaptation operates on timelines measured in years rather than weeks or months. This mismatch between immediate demand and long-term supply adjustment creates sustained pressure within the system. From a macroeconomic perspective, the situation illustrates the risks associated with concentrated supply dependencies. When a single external source provides a majority share of a critical input, the system becomes vulnerable to changes in that source. These changes do not need to be extreme to produce significant effects. Even partial adjustments can alter pricing availability and operational stability. The concept of supply chain concentration risk has been studied extensively in economic literature. Historical examples include disruptions in semiconductor production, rare earth minerals, and energy supply. In each case, dependency on limited sources created conditions where localized changes produced global impact.
The canola oil situation reflects a similar dynamic within the food manufacturing sector. The scale of the American food industry amplifies the effect. With an estimated value exceeding $300 billion, even small percentage changes in input costs translate into large, absolute financial impacts. These impacts are distributed across multiple levels, including manufacturers, distributors, retailers, and consumers. Retail pricing adjustments represent the final stage of this process. As input costs increase, companies must determine whether to absorb those costs, reduce margins, or pass them on to consumers. In competitive markets, margin compression has limits, leading to gradual price increases across product categories. These increases are typically not uniform, but vary based on product formulation, brand positioning, and supply chain flexibility. Consumer impact, therefore, appears as incremental price changes rather than a single large adjustment. However, the cumulative effect becomes significant over time. From a policy perspective, the event highlights the importance of monitoring non-traditional strategic assets. Agricultural commodities are often categorized as routine economic goods rather than strategic leverage points. This categorization can lead to underestimation of their importance within broader economic systems. The integration of agricultural inputs into manufacturing supply chains creates dependencies that extend beyond primary production. Understanding these dependencies requires analysis that connects commodity data with industrial usage patterns. In the case of canola oil, the connection between agricultural production and food manufacturing created a direct pathway for impact. This pathway remained largely unexamined because the system functioned without disruption for an extended period. The absence of disruption can lead to reduced attention and decreased risk perception. This phenomenon is consistent with behavioral patterns observed in economic systems where stability reduces perceived vulnerability. When disruption eventually occurs, the adjustment process is more complex because preparedness levels are low. The speed of the recent changes further limited the ability to respond effectively. Simultaneous implementation of multiple policy elements, including export adjustments, domestic investment, and international agreements, reduced the availability of transitional options. By the time market participants recognized the full scope of the changes, key supply allocations had already been redirected. This sequencing demonstrates the impact of coordinated policy execution. Isolated actions produce limited effects, but integrated actions across multiple components of a system create compounded impact. The international dimension of the policy also played a significant role. By securing long-term agreements with other regions, Canada effectively redistributed supply before open market competition could adjust. These agreements provided stability for new buyers while reducing flexibility for existing ones. This approach highlights the strategic use of contracts as a tool for supply control. Contractual commitments create predictable flows and reduce exposure to market volatility for those included within the agreements. At the same time, they increase exposure for those outside them. The redistribution of supply through contracts therefore alters competitive positioning within global markets. Countries and companies with secured access gain stability, while others face increased uncertainty. This shift can influence future trade relationships and investment decisions. In response to these developments, industry participants have begun exploring diversification strategies. Diversification involves reducing reliance on a single source by expanding supply options across multiple regions. While this approach improves resilience, it also introduces additional complexity. Multiple suppliers require coordination across different regulatory environments, logistics systems, and pricing structures. This complexity increases operational costs but provides greater flexibility in managing disruptions. Long-term adaptation may include increased domestic production of alternative oil crops. However, such changes depend on agricultural economics, including land availability, crop profitability, and environmental conditions. Farmers respond to market incentives, but adjustments occur gradually due to the biological and logistical nature of agriculture. Infrastructure investment represents another component of adaptation. Processing facilities, storage capacity, and transportation networks must align with changes in supply patterns. These investments require significant capital and extended development timelines. The combination of agricultural adjustment and infrastructure development defines the long-term response framework. In the short term, the system continues to operate under adjusted conditions.
Production continues with modified cost structures. Supply chains adapt within existing constraints. Market participants monitor developments and adjust strategies accordingly. The overall system remains functional, but operates with reduced efficiency compared to previous conditions. This reduction in efficiency represents the cost of adjustment. Over time, new equilibria emerge as supply-demand and pricing align under updated conditions. The timeline for this process depends on the speed of investment, the availability of alternatives, and the stability of the broader environment. From an analytical perspective, the event provides a case study in supply chain vulnerability and strategic resource management. It demonstrates how dependencies can develop within complex systems and how those dependencies can be leveraged through coordinated action. It also illustrates the importance of integrating data across sectors to identify potential risk points. Agricultural data, industrial usage, and trade relationships must be analyzed together to understand system-level exposure. Future resilience depends on the ability to identify and address such exposures before they become disruptive. This requires continuous monitoring, scenario analysis, and investment in flexibility. Flexibility allows systems to absorb shocks and adapt without significant loss of function. In the absence of flexibility, systems remain efficient under stable conditions, but become vulnerable under stress. Balancing efficiency and resilience represents a central challenge in modern economic planning. The canola oil disruption highlights this trade-off in a concrete and measurable way. It shows that systems optimized for efficiency may require additional investment to achieve resilience, and it demonstrates that seemingly ordinary inputs can hold strategic importance when integrated into large-scale production networks. The implications extend beyond the immediate event. They influence how companies evaluate supply chains, how governments assess economic security, and how markets price risk. As these assessments evolve, future decisions will incorporate lessons derived from this experience. The process of adjustment is ongoing, and its outcomes will shape the next phase of development within the food manufacturing sector and related industries.